I've identified two major unconscious conflicts inside the inner world of nearly every creative person I've worked with. The number one conflict is the tension between visibility and invisibility, and the number two conflict is the war between authenticity and commercial viability, or being a sellout, whatever that might mean to you. At its worst, in the archetypal dysfunction, so to speak, we have the starving artist paradigm, which represents one swing of both of these conflicts put together. You have invisibility plus authenticity equals starving artist. This is the man or woman who identifies as a brilliant, gifted, creative soul, but woe is he or she. Their poetry, their artwork, their music, it never catches on, and they're never witnessed by the world, and they never make any money. They actually have a pretty desperate, paltry life. And then the flip side of that unconscious war between the opposites, if it's not the starving artist, it's again the commercial sellout. This is someone who's very visible and has figured out how to be entrepreneurial and financially successful with whatever art that might be. That might be making postcards or Christmas cards, or maybe making pop music, maybe making beats that go to pop music, maybe being a dancer for, I don't know, something like a stage show, like a mainstream stage show which doesn't represent the artist's original intention to be a luxury ballet dancer, and actually they're just a street dancer in the ensemble or whatever it might be. There are many, many examples of these two paradigms, and what I'm going to try and do in this episode of Inner Work Essentials is use the internal family systems therapy model, or the parts work model, to show you how you can start to resolve this series of unconscious conflicts inside of yourself, to neither be locked into the starving artist or the commercial sellout paradigms, but actually find a way to concretize your authentic, gifted, creative potential without squandering your uniqueness to a commercial dissolution or dilution into something which is something which is forgettable, bland, and honestly a bastardization of what you could actually bring forwards, and to not be a starving artist who arrogantly self-pedestalizes inside the shadows and thinks that somehow their grandiosity and their preciousness around their beautiful poems and their beautiful short stories are somehow going to help the world in any way, when really they're just masturbating with their own creative vision off in some lonely corner. I'm not trying to trigger anyone too intensely. I've definitely seen both aspects of these paradigms inside of myself, because this is where it gets to the archetypal story, or the parts-based story. In today's episode of Inner Work Essentials, I am going to be holding up this book about internal family systems therapy, which is a trauma healing modality developed by Richard Schwartz. I already did a previous episode in this series on the main book here. Hopefully you can see it. Internal Family Therapy, 2nd edition. And I also have this book, Somatic Internal Family Therapy. They're all wonderful books. I highly recommend you learn the system yourself. It shows us how we have exiled parts and managerial parts and different emergency parts which come through depending on the conflicts that we're experiencing in ourselves. But the field itself, the IFS model, is so broad and so applicable to so many people that I've really paused on how to make this video worthwhile to you. And ultimately, as you can see from the title and the thumbnail, I decided on applying this work to a creative, to someone who, throughout their life, I mean, if you relate to this, you relate to this, usually about the age of 6, 7, 8, 9, you start developing a creative persona, or at least the sapling beginnings of a creative persona, where you identify yourself in contrast to your peers, the other school children, or maybe your parents or your brother and sister, as the creative one. And maybe we go through a series of evolution through our teenage years, and then into our 20s or our 30s, where we keep privately, or maybe externally, developing this persona where we are the creative type. I don't need to go into too many examples of what that type might be, but my intention for this video is to try and blend the IFS model of exiled parts and unconscious material into the very lived reality of most brilliant creatives that I've worked with one-on-one, and also elements of my own story where I realized that arrogance or grandiosity, as well as some kind of distortion or some kind of cowardice, all these elements can play together as unconscious conflicts. There is a solution for these unconscious conflicts, but it's going to require a significant period of inner work. Because let's take the conflict of visibility versus invisibility. Something which is really common is that someone who has the creative core personality type, they will be incredibly reluctant to learn social media, to learn marketing, which really, although it may seem like a business term, is just a way of showing up into the world. A good marketer is someone who can show up either their product or their service, and ideally, if it's a service, it will serve. To be a marketer as a creative means to show up into the public square and serve your gift. And yet, the core creative type, maybe a romantic version of the creative type, somehow believes that it's better, that it's more noble to privately work away for years and produce a magnum opus which never gets printed, with the vague, mystical understanding that someone will discover their brilliance after their death and they'll be like a, 18th century poet. It's not going to fucking happen. That is not going to happen in the slightest. And also, there's another dysfunction there. This is where the unconscious work really needs to be looked at. There's a gap between the persona and the reality, the internal image of who someone might believe they are as a creative, and the actual concretization of that image in the external world. And this is something which might be quite triggering for someone who's in this stage themselves. Let's take a painter as an example. A painter who identifies as being a painter or an artist, and yet they only paint when inspiration strikes. They don't have a practice, they don't go out for a few hours every day or at least a few times a week. They actually produce only the odd watercolor or the odd sketch a few times a month when inspiration strikes, as if the muses descend from the heavens and they are sparked by Eros, the holy god of creative wonder. And yet, of course, they're not going to make very much of a creative living, and they're still going to the office for the 9 to 5. They're still maybe quite poor and haven't figured out their finances even into their 30s, 40s, or even 50s, because they haven't done the unconscious integration work to realize the present moment inspiration feeling, which is so juicy and bubbly and electric and makes you feel like you're a genius on planet Earth, that shouldn't be overvalued at the detriment of a reliable, consistent, creative structure where you show up at the typewriter, or you show up at the easel, or you show up in the studio, and you move through the motions. It's this classic quote that's attributed to many different creatives, and inspiration always strikes at 9 o'clock in the morning because that's when you sit down to do the creative work. I'm playing with many abstract themes here, and hopefully you're following. I'm bringing out a few different stories. I'm not trying to give you a step-by-step. This is how you solve every creative function, because if you are a creative person, you're going to be pretty unique in your inner world. You're going to have a variety of ways that you want to go about doing your creative service. But what's obvious is that there needs to be a balance between the conscious and unconscious elements of the creative process that actually mean doing things which are counterintuitive. Within the internal family systems model, we have a part or a series of parts that are subcategorized as exiles. These are usually younger parts or more tender parts, which we don't want to look at. Within the creative, it's typically this strange neurosis around wanting to be seen, and yet not being willing to actually put themselves out there into the world. People who are, well, I'm going to speak specifically to one type of person. I'm going to speak to the person who's already found out a way to make at least some impact in terms of visibility, in terms of receiving financial compensation for their beautiful creations. They've got an Instagram, they've got an Etsy, and they've got a DeviantArt. I don't know if that's still a thing. Is that like 2010? They've got some kind of appearance in the outer world. They've made some money. But that transition to being a full-time artist, that will never happen unless someone withdraws the feeling of being hooked, and I mean hooked, on a series of emotional feelings about what it means to be an artist, and create a consistent structure where they get a bit more commercial and a bit more predictable, to actually allow themselves to create far more beauty, far more consistently, and really live a creative lifestyle. I mean, for myself, not to go too much into the IFS model, something that I really had to learn when it came to writing poetry is that I'd always enjoyed writing. I'd always enjoyed it as my teenage years. I'd enjoyed words. But it's only when I sat down to make a creative writing process where I wrote every day that I actually became semi-prolific. I'll put some of my poetry up on the screen right now. These are some of the poems that really brought forward my talents. But the end result is nowhere near the process itself. The process itself was sitting down for 3 or 4 hours sometimes to just get a single verse, not feeling it at all. And yet another time, maybe inspiration strikes and I get the whole thing at once. But I can't rely on the whole thing coming at once, can I? And yet, we sometimes think that that's actually the way that we need to do it. This is again another unconscious conflict between a younger, normally more childlike, more naive, more innocent creative identity that wants to wait for inspiration to strike, as opposed to the more adult, entrepreneurial, potentially more masculine if you want to take that frame, that energy which allows for a structure which is reliable so that the unreliable inspiration can land in that walled container. It's really quite a difficult place to give step-by-step instructions. The other paradigm that I see people falling into with this unconscious conflict of creative and uncreative parts, this is a huge shadow, this is just a huge unawareness, so smile on my face because I'm going to point it out. I hate to see, and I will say hate because I hate to see talent and potential being squandered. I really take it quite personally when I've worked with a client who might be a musical virtuoso, or they're an incredible figure drawer, or whatever it might be. There's a few different examples. I don't want to, if anyone's watching this who's worked with me and you know who you are, well, you're a creative, brilliant person. I hope you're still doing your practices, because please keep bringing that into the world. I hate to see when consistency isn't brought forward because there's an unconscious conflict, or there's an unconscious inability to actually, how will I frame it? To do the difficult, non-creative work for a period of maybe months or years, to be able to transition a whole lifestyle to be a genuinely aligned, full-time creative lifestyle, which, if you believe yourself in your heart of hearts, privately behind all appearances, to be a creative genius or gifted in your potential for creativity, to do anything less than saying fuck off to the 9-to-5 job and no thank you to the social situations, let's say, or romantic situations, which would pull you away from that practice of multiple decades of full-time creativity, to do anything less than withdrawing that energy and gradually reorienting the lifestyle, maybe moving to a different country, maybe downsizing your life and really focusing on the craft itself. That's really disrespect. It's self-disrespect in my view of what that means, because, as you can see from what I've done, the library behind me, the life I live, this whole series itself, this wouldn't be possible if I tried to stay within a certain paradigm where I'm gifted only in the AM and I actually become a more regular member of society, which is fine, but not for me, because I knew that I wanted to do something which was for myself and gave back to others in a distinctly fingerprint-style way, which only I could do. If this comes across as elitist to you, then that's okay. For another person, it might actually come across as something which is empowering, because I'm trying to speak to that very private voice inside, which knows they are meant for more. And if you want to honor that moreness, do the unconscious parts work. Spend a period of multiple months doing inner work. I find that 4 months to 1 year of really solid inner work, shadow integration, parts integration, and just generally discovering the aspects of the persona which we have yet to integrate and could probably benefit from. Usually, again, it's structure and consistency and organizing in the external world to be able to bring forward more spaciousness. and more time for the internal creativity and health. Also, diet, lifestyle, exercise. Much easier if you're in shape and you're in a good lifestyle, non-drug addled situation to consistently receive the inspiration, because otherwise your nervous system is going to be frazzled. You're going to be, unreliable. To put it briefly, to put it not too intensely. There are many different things that can be done. Again, internal family systems therapy. This book, internal family systems therapy. This book, somatically, and of course the golden gem of the whole series, Richard Schwartz's second edition. I'll link it up there in the video. I'm going to leave the video here though. Next video, we're going to go straight into another part of the creative process, which is perfectionism and self-criticism. We're going to be looking at how to embrace your inner critic, which is particularly important for creatives, because that's also going to stop you from getting your work out into the world. Next episode in Inner Work Essentials. I'll see you over there.